In 2009, an elderly woman in Macedonia was spending a quiet evening at home when she heard a knock at her door. When she opened the door, she was met with a young man, looking desperate. He told her his mother was gravely ill, and he begged for money to pay for her treatment. Moved by his story, the woman invited him inside. But the man carried something strange, a folded newspaper he never let go of. Once he was inside, the act of kindness turned to horror. He reached into the folded newspaper and pulled out an axe. He struck, killing the woman before she even had the chance to scream. Afterwards, he scoured the home, searching every corner for gold jewelry, items he could sell quickly for cash. To him, her life had been worth nothing more than the price of his next fix. This was not an isolated act of violence. It was one of 4 murders committed by Viktor Karamarkov, a Macedonian serial killer who admitted he killed to feed his drug addiction. Each time, his method was the same: a knock at the door, a desperate story, and a hidden weapon waiting to be revealed.
For 27 years, we were led to believe this child was missing. How was she in the house the entire time? This story starts way back in 1998 in a small town near Warsaw in Poland. Back then, this girl called Mirella was just 15 years old. Now, the neighborhood was quite a close one. It was one where all the neighbors kind of know each other. It was a nice community like that. And some of the neighbors started to notice that they hadn't seen this teenage girl in a while. Mirella was nowhere to be seen. So a few of the curious neighbors asked her parents, where is she? And it was even more unsettling for them all because the parents didn't know. They said she'd gone missing. For a total of 27 years, that was the story. Nobody heard a thing about where she had vanished to, and it ended up being one of those tragic cases that just seems to go cold. That was until a disturbance at the house this year. Now, we don't know what the exact disturbance was, but regardless, it made police show up at the house. They walked in to see what the hell was going on, opened the bedroom door, and Mirella was there. She was apparently emaciated. She was in a really, really bad way. Her bones were sticking out and she desperately needed medical attention. Obviously, police took her away immediately. They got her straight to the hospital, and people are speculating what the hell happened here. Now, it's reported that Mirella had actually said when she was asked that she wasn't being held against her will. People are like, did your parents lock you in your bedroom? And she said no, but it's not really clear whether maybe she's been psychologically abused. Maybe she's been told to say this. Police said that they are investigating whether there was any psychological or physical abuse. And I've seen reports stating that her hair and her teeth were in a critical condition. Now, I don't know how your hair can be in a critical condition. I don't know whether that's just sort of a language barrier with the translating the story. Mirella says though that she's never been to a hairdresser's, the dentist, a doctor's even, and she also said she's never even been outside for a walk or even seen fresh air. So what do we think? How did a seemingly healthy 15-year-old girl suddenly stop leaving her bedroom and go missing?
Sometimes I think it would be really cool to work as a park ranger or at a remote fire tower lookout in the middle of the forest. But then I come across missing person cases like this one, and my mind changes so fast. Because this was a woman who had spent the last 13 years of her life working at the same lookout tower. So she knew the area extremely well. But one summer morning in 2006, she failed to check in for her morning weather report. And when one of her coworkers went to go check on her, they found her cabin and tower empty. There was a smear of blood on the stairs and a pot of boiling water on the stove, but she was nowhere to be found. This happened 19 years ago, and no trace of her has ever been found, and that's what scares me the most, just vanishing into thin air, where the only thing left behind is a sinister piece of evidence that something horrible happened. This is the mysterious disappearance of Stephanie Stewart, and it is really disturbing because there are no real answers, so let's talk about it. This is Stephanie Stewart. She was 70 years old when she mysteriously disappeared in 2006. Stephanie was an avid reader and loved the outdoors. Although she was older, she often cycled across Canada, and just the year before she disappeared, she climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. I feel like those who looked at her really underestimated how athletic she was simply because she was 70. Stephanie spent her summers working as a seasonal fire tower worker near Hinton, which is a town in the foothills of Alberta, Canada. She had spent the past 13 summers of her life at the same Athabasca lookout tower in the Jasper National Park. So every year from April to September, she would work alone at this same lookout lookout tower, and her job was to monitor for potential wildfires. She loved it because she loved being outdoors, and at this lookout tower, she was surrounded by wilderness, nothing but rolling hills, lakes, and forests, and minimal people. Since she had been coming back to this same spot for the past 13 years, she knew the area extremely well and knew how to keep herself safe in the wilderness all alone. She usually spent her time at the lookout tending to a large garden, reading, and painting. But on August 26th, 2006, this would all change. Stephanie had a cabin at the base from where she would check in 3 times a day, 7 days a week, as per protocol. The last time anyone heard from her was the night prior, on August 25th, 2006 at 9 p.m. She spoke to a family member on the phone, and after this, she vanished. The next day, Stephanie missed her morning check-in. Every morning, she would radio in a weather report, but this morning, everything at the tower was silent. Her coworkers tried calling her several times, but they never received an answer, and this caused them to worry since this was super unusual for her. So an employee was sent to check on her, and they discovered her cabin empty. But the scariest part is that they found a smear of blood on the stairs and a pot of boiling water on the stove, almost as if she had just stepped out and would be right back. This is when police were called, which prompted an immediate and massive search. The RCMP found a couple of things that worried them. One was obviously the blood, but they also found that her personal belongings, including 2 pillows, her burgundy bed sheets, her brown duvet, and her gold watch were all missing from the scene. Search and rescue, along with tracking dogs and over 100 volunteers, scoured the forest surrounding the tower, but neither Stephanie or her personal belongings were ever found, and this was an extensive search too. Authorities searched on foot, on boat, and even by air, but still, no trace of Stephanie was ever located. At first, RCMP thought that she could have been attacked by a wild animal as they found animal hairs, prints, and scat near the tower. But after examining her cabin and finding the blood and her belongings missing, they ruled her disappearance as suspicious and believed that she could have been murdered. Stephanie is presumed dead and a victim of homicide, but although we don't know what happened to her, there is one theory that locals believe could be true. And I just want to preface this by saying what I'm about to say is all alleged, not confirmed, just what locals who have ties to the case are saying. A person who reportedly has family in the RCMP has stated that they believe Stephanie was killed by a man in the area who had a grudge against her. It's not known what the grudge really was, but there's a rumor that Stephanie complained about this man a few times about the way that he was treating the forest, and so she was targeted by this man to stop the complaints. And since she was alone in this tower, it probably would have been easy to break in without anyone knowing and hurt her. How true this is though, I'm not sure. Stephanie's disappearance led the province to tighten the security measures for the lookout towers and their employees. All signs that had directions to the lookout towers have been removed. There are now locked gates on the roads that block the public from accessing the towers. Staff are now required to check in more frequently and take self-defense classes, as well as carry personal radios with them 24/7. And there have been panic buttons installed in the towers in case of emergency. Stephanie's case is so terrifying to me because it's like she just vanished into thin air, and the only clue left behind is a drop of her blood. It's also so scary to me because she spent 13 years of her life at this tower, and she knew her way around, so it's clear that whatever happened to her was not by her own doing. But it's now been 19 years, and whatever happened to Stephanie that night at that remote tower remains a mystery.
On February 24th, 2,000 accused gang members were moved into the new mega prison in El Salvador that can hold 40,000 inmates, making it the largest prison in the Americas. It's part of the government's crackdown on crime. In March of 2022, at the president's urging, Congress passed emergency measures that have since been extended multiple times. They've limited civil rights so that arrests can be made without a warrant, and detainees no longer have a right to a lawyer. As a result, 64,000 suspects have been arrested, and the murder rate has fallen by 57%.
How did these supposedly perfect newlyweds end up dead in a car just days before their anniversary? So it was very late at night on the 6th of October in Harvard, Illinois. A police officer just happened to be driving along the road, and suddenly he noticed a car with their hazards on. Now, obviously this could have been somebody in danger, maybe they'd had a car crash, maybe they'd broken down, so the police officer decided to pull over and help them out. Horrifically though, the 2 people in the car were dead. A woman was slumped in the driver's seat and a man was next to her in the passenger seat, also dead. And he could very clearly tell that they were dead because they both had a gunshot wound to their heads. At first, the officer was thinking, who the hell has done this? Has somebody murdered these two and then run off? Is the community at risk? He immediately ordered a shelter-in-place order to the locals because obviously this could be extremely dangerous if anybody's out and about and a murderer's on the loose. So who were the two victims? Well, the woman was 29-year-old Rachel Dumovich and her husband was 30-year-old Brandon from Sharon in Wisconsin. Rachel was extremely beautiful, as you can see, very, very well-liked girl. She was ambitious, she was athletic. She was also a really kind woman who always stuck up for people who needed her help. She loved hanging out with friends and family. She seemed like a very creative girl with a real eye for making things pretty. She loved fashion, she loved cooking. And Brandon served as an officer in the US Navy, and he was apparently a family man with a sharp sense of humor. They were heartbreakingly just days away from their first wedding anniversary. This made no sense. The pair first met in middle school when she was just 12 years old, and she'd apparently got his attention by stealing his aftershave from him and running off with it just to sort of wind him up. They stayed in touch, they were friends, but they officially began dating in 2022, and Brandon proposed just a year later. Now, after first believing that this could have been a double murder with a killer on the loose, police then found something in the car. They found a G in the vehicle with this pair. So they then turn their attention to, well, maybe is this a murder self-unaliving? They say that they are considering this, but they are keeping obviously options open. They're keeping their minds open to all of the possibilities. So what do you guys think? What's happened here? How could this seemingly happen totally out of the blue?
He was obsessed with scary movies. He would even dress up as infamous horror movie killers before committing an absolutely brutal murder and then trying to fake insanity to get away with it. This is up there with one of the most bizarre interrogations I've ever seen. He didn't know that he was being filmed, so he would act differently when the detectives would enter or leave the room.
I would offer I'm going to ask for an attorney.
Dawson McGee was one of 4 children to his father and his mother, Kathleen. His mother, Kathleen, was a senseless woman and an amazing mother. She would spend all of her free time volunteering, but her main priority was always her children. Like, not only was she a stay-at-home mom, but she would homeschool her 4 children. But her son, Dawson, was a bit of a problem child. Dawson was diagnosed with ADHD. He would act out. He would start fights with his siblings. His siblings would say that Dawson would do anything for attention, especially their mother's attention, and that he was extremely manipulative. Dawson graduated high school and college and got a job, but only a few years into the workforce, Dawson told his mom that he was depressed. He quit his job and moved back home with his parents. And pretty much from then on, Kathleen would do everything for her adult son, Dawson. She paid for everything for him. She cooked all of his meals. She cleaned up after him. She was even doing Dawson's laundry. And Dawson's dad and siblings did not like this. They felt like Dawson was taking advantage of Kathleen, that he didn't respect her and just expected his mother to do everything for him. After his father and siblings started coming for him, Dawson then began telling his mom that he was experiencing anxiety, that he was hearing voices, and that he was seeing things that weren't there. Dawson saw a psychiatrist and was diagnosed with a psychotic disorder, but still, his siblings accused him of faking it all for their mother's attention. And then Dawson developed symptoms of Parkinson's disease, but only after spending time with an uncle with Parkinson's. His siblings said that he would only show these symptoms around their mother and just accused him of faking this as well. Dawson's siblings would say that he was extremely manipulative, and especially of their mother, Kathleen. that Dawson could switch back and forth from being the sweetest person ever to being like the scariest person ever if he didn't get his way. And they would try and tell their mom that she was being manipulated by their brother Dawson, but their mother Kathleen always defended Dawson. Around this time, Dawson also became obsessed with scary movies and horror movie villains. He would dress up as Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers, like with the mask and all, and he would go out in public like this any time of the year, not just around Halloween. Dawson's mother, Kathleen, was always volunteering, and she began working with survivors of abuse. Through her work, Kathleen took a course on manipulative family members. And it was like a light switch went on, and she finally realized that her adult son, Dawson, had been manipulating her for years. And after this, Kathleen stopped cooking for him, she stopped cleaning up after him, she stopped doing literally everything for him, and this made Dawson furious. He actually got in such a big fight with his parents that the police had to be called. The beginning of October 2011, Dawson's baby sister Caitlin actually moved back in with the family as well because she was going to be getting married soon, and she wanted to spend some extra time with her mom planning the wedding before she went off and started her own family. And now there's like levels to Dawson's anger at this point because now he's getting even less attention from his mom that he was already getting. So that month, Dawson just like locked himself away in his room. He was so moody and gloomy. He wouldn't talk to his baby sister Caitlin, let alone look at her. And that takes us to Halloween weekend 2011. That weekend, Dawson's dad and sister Caitlin were both away that weekend. They were doing different things, but this left just Dawson and his mom Kathleen home alone together. On October 30th, the day before Halloween, around 4 p.m., Kathleen was in her bedroom getting ready to go pick up her youngest daughter, Caitlin, from a weekend retreat, when a man entered her bedroom wearing a Halloween mask and holding a big knife. And this was, of course, Kathleen's son, Dawson, and he fatally stabbed his mother, Kathleen, 10 times. Meanwhile, his sister Caitlin is expecting their mom to come pick her up, and she's calling her mom over and over and over again, and her mom's not picking up. So eventually, Dawson actually called back his sister and said that their mom was sick, so he was going to come and pick her up. And Caitlin definitely thought this was strange because remember, at this point, her brother's not even speaking to her or like looking at her. Dawson picked up his sister around 5 p.m. and Caitlin noticed that her brother, who was usually really gloomy and moody, seemed to be in a really good mood. He's so happy because he just killed his mom, the mom that has literally done everything for him his entire life. After picking up his sister, Dawson drove an hour out of the way. He got lost a bunch of times. He made a pit stop at his garden dealer's house, anything to stall his sister from getting home and finding their mother's dead body. And by the time they finally got home, it was 11 p.m. So it was really late. And Dawson told his sister that, their mother's sick, she's resting, so everyone went to bed. The next morning, it's Halloween, and Caitlin wants to go check on their sick mom, but Dawson once again tries to stall her. But eventually, Caitlin was adamant on checking on her mom, but her mom's bedroom door was locked. So she's knocking on it, she's calling out for her mom, but she's not answering, and she's worried because her mom is apparently sick. Maybe she's having a medical emergency, so she calls 911. So imagine the shock and horror when they knock down the door and they find Kathleen dead on the floor in a pool of her own blood, murdered. Kathleen died with her car keys in her hand, like gripped in her hand. She was moments away from leaving the house to go pick up her daughter when her son came in and killed her for no reason. And by this point, Dawson had fled the home, so now this small town had a killer on the run on Halloween night. But he was later found that same night around 1 a.m. and he was arrested. In his interrogation, Dawson didn't know that there was a camera filming him the entire time, so he would stutter and shake his hand whenever the police were in the room, but the second the detective would leave the room, he would stop.
Hi, Dawson. Hi. How you doing? I'm okay. How are you doing? I'm all right. How are you? I want to talk to you about what happened to your mom. What happened to my mom? Well, you tell me. People called me and said something happened at home to Mom. They were very sad. Mm-hmm. What happened to my mom? Well, that's what I'm asking you.
I was waiting for that my brother and sister to tell me.
Okay. Well, so, was your sister home this weekend?
Wait, I'm supposed to have an attorney?
If you want one.
Am I supposed to have I should request an attorney.
Well, that's up to you if you'd like one. But, I mean, we'd like to talk to you.
You're supposed to have an attorney. Go on, I would offer, I want to ask for an attorney.
Do you want to ask for an attorney?
Yeah.
Okay. Then at this point, I'm done talking to you. I can't talk to you anymore about the case because you told me that you wanted an attorney here.
Oh, okay.
All right. If you change your mind about that and you decide you want to talk to me, you need to let me know or let one of the officers here know. Okay.
Oh, okay.
All right. I'm gonna be right back.
And at his trial, he of course pled not guilty by reason of insanity. But a jury found him legally sane and he was found guilty of second-degree murder and he was sentenced to 16 years to life in prison, meaning that he will be eligible for parole in 2028, which is only like 3 years away. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think there's a chance that they will ever let him out? I don't think so, but let me know what your thoughts are. I'm interested to hear all your thoughts and opinions in the comments, but while you're there, please remember to always be respectful. Kathleen does have 3 more children. They could possibly be in the comments. You don't know who could be in the comments, so always just be nice and respectful. And while you're in the comments, please let me know what case you want me to cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that I covered this case. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much for listening to Kathleen's story. If you did make it to the end, let me know somehow by like dropping red emojis so I know you made it to the end. And I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
If you need a reason to never go on a cruise, just look up how many people either mysteriously die on or go missing from them. And whenever I start thinking that it would be fun, I automatically think of this guy. He disappeared from a Royal Caribbean cruise ship in 2005 on what was supposed to be an exciting 2-week honeymoon with his new wife. A lot of his blood was found in his cabin and on the side of the ship, and at first, police thought that he simply fell overboard in an accident. But then little things started to not really add up, like how the last 4 men that he was ever seen with, who he met on the cruise, used his key card to enter his cabin. And then shortly after, neighbors heard a massive fight out on his balcony and a horrific thud. How these same 4 men recorded themselves after, laughing and joking about its death. Yet at the time, no one knew he was even missing. How again, these same 4 men also SA'd an 18-year-old girl on the very same cruise ship. And they recorded that as well, yet nothing was ever done about it. This is probably one of the very few cases where we know exactly what happened and who was involved. There's just not enough evidence to prove it. This is the mysterious disappearance and likely murder of George Smith. And in this case, everyone has something to hide and seems to be lying, so let's talk about it. This is George Smith. He was 26 years old when he suddenly and very mysteriously disappeared in 2005. George was a computer search engine analyst, and he lived in Greenwich, Connecticut with the rest of his family, who he was really close with. Everyone who knew him said that he was the funniest man alive, and if he loved you with his whole heart. And he was also incredibly smart too. On June 25th, 2005, he married a woman named Jennifer, who was about to become a school teacher, and together they seemed really happy. They had a beautiful cliffside ceremony in Newport, Rhode Island, and this was only the start of what they thought would be a long and beautiful life. But sadly, this would all be cut short just 11 days later. It's now June 29th, 2005, and the newlyweds set off for a 2-week Mediterranean honeymoon cruise. It was something they were both excited about because they would make stops in some of the most beautiful destinations, like Greece, Turkey, and Italy. They boarded the Royal Caribbean Brilliance of the Seas cruise ship and set sail from Barcelona, Spain. Once on the ship, the couple quickly began making new friends, one of which was Josh Askin, Baskin, who was a California college student, and his family, who were also on the cruise. They all bonded on a tour of Florence, Italy, and George, Jennifer, and Josh all became super close right off the bat. The day George disappeared was probably one of the best days of his life. He and Jennifer spent the day touring Mykonos, which is one of his favorite places, and that night, the two had a romantic dinner on the ship and toasted to their future together. At around midnight, the couple went to the casino on the 3rd floor of the ship and began drinking quite a bit. There they met up with Josh and 3 other men, Greg and Zach Rosenberg, who were cousins, and their friend Rusty Kaufman. They were all Russian-American students at the time who were also all on the cruise. The cruise ship security cameras capture everyone throughout the night, and at first everything seems to be going okay. A couple of hours go by, and this is when they all decide to go to the cruise ship's disco. There they got even more drunk, and some reports say that they were drinking a bottle of absinthe that George secretly snuck on the ship, which he supposedly got when they docked at the French Riviera. This is when 3:30 in the morning hits, and this is when George and his new wife Jennifer have an argument. It's not entirely known what the argument was about, but according to their friend Josh, it was likely about Jennifer being flirty with some of the men at the casino. Josh says that she was blatantly flirting with men in front of George, even including the casino's manager, and according to him, the manager was seen putting his arm around her. This caused George and Jennifer to get into a fight, which ended in Jennifer kneeing him in the groin and leaving alone. More specifically, leaving George behind. George continued to party with Josh, Greg, Zach, and Rusty for another 20 minutes or so before they all went back to George's cabin, room 9062, up on the 9th floor of the ship. The ship's key entry system records George and the men using the key and entering the room at 3:52 a.m., and they were expecting to see Jennifer there, but the room was empty. Drunk and wanting to look for his new wife, George and the men then leave the cabin to search the ship for her, but then they return to the cabin and are recorded again using the key and entering the room at 4:01 a.m. According to the 4 men, since they couldn't find Jennifer, they just helped put a really drunk George to bed. They took off his shoes, tucked him in, and left, proceeding to go back to their cabin and order a bunch of room service. That was that, and nothing more. Fast forward about 20 minutes. This puts us at 4:20 in the morning, and this is when some of the cruise ship staff find Jennifer. She was passed out drunk in a hallway in front of someone else's room. They quickly helped her back to her cabin, which was recorded once again on the key entry system. George should have been sound asleep in his bed, as only 20 minutes or so had passed since the 4 men supposedly tucked him into bed. But something happened in that 20 minutes, because George was nowhere to be found. The room was completely empty, and this was confirmed by the cruise ship employees. But Jennifer was so drunk that she just fell right to sleep, not knowing that something was horribly wrong. And just a few hours later, her life would never be the same. At around 8:30 the next morning, so roughly 4 hours later, one of the passengers on the ship woke up and wanted to take some beautiful pictures of the water. The metal lifeboat canopy, which was right below George's cabin, was covered in blood. Like, so much so that when this passenger looked at it, their first thought was that someone died there. In the blood appeared to be some handprints and footprints. So obviously the cruise ship security team was notified, who took a tally of everyone on the ship. And this is when they realized that the occupants of cabin 9062 were unaccounted for. Thankfully, they were able to quickly locate Jennifer, who was at the ship's spa for a scheduled massage. But George, nowhere to be found. This is when they informed her that George was missing, and a ton of blood was found beneath their cabin. So they asked her where he was, but she had no idea. She told police that she was so intoxicated the night before that she remembers nothing after fighting with George and leaving the casino alone. She tells them how she was found blacked out in a hallway at 4:20 in the morning, and when she got back to her cabin, George was not there. She didn't think much of it because I guess this wasn't the first time on the cruise that they had slept in different cabins. I don't know what their dynamic was, but George had reportedly stayed with Josh one night, and then with another couple who he befriended on the cruise another night. The ship was about to dock in Turkey, so while the ship was in port, Turkish police got involved and started searching and conducting interviews on the ship. But what's horrible is that Royal Caribbean didn't lock the ship down at all, so anyone was allowed to freely exit the ship, destroying any potential evidence or possibly contaminating it. It wasn't long into their investigation that suspicion started rising. Not only was George's blood found on the side of the ship, but his blood was also found in his own cabin. It wasn't a lot by any means, but it was a few drops of his blood on the bed sheets. The couple's cabin was messy, but not really trashed, and nothing appeared to be missing. But one thing police did find odd though was one of the ship's lounge chairs. It was pushed directly up against the railing, which stuck out to them and honestly made them feel like this could be a situation where George just jumped and ended his own life. Authorities used the key entry system and security footage from the ship to piece together a rough timeline, and they feel that George either fell or was intentionally pushed overboard at around 4 a.m. or shortly after, and that his body was somewhere in the water between Turkey and Greece. A massive search for George was kickstarted, but to this day, his body has never been found. Outside of not remembering much, Jennifer was quickly ruled out because of the time when she was found that night. She was found so far away from her and George's cabin, and it was right around the time when George is believed to have gone overboard, so this timeline rules her out as a suspect. Police then started interviewing the last known people to see George alive, which were his new friends, Josh, Greg, Zach, and Rusty. They told the police everything I told you earlier about them supposedly tucking him in and then leaving to go order some room service. But after a few interrogations, their stories started to fall apart. Josh began acting nervous and trying to deflect a lot of the attention off himself and to the ship's casino manager. He told police that the casino manager was super weird and overly flirty with Jennifer the night George disappeared, and he insisted that when Jennifer got in that fight with George and left, that the manager immediately followed her out. Josh said this really needed to be looked into and to go and interview him, so they did. But the casino manager was quickly cleared, and this was for a few reasons. Not only did Josh completely lie when he said he followed Jennifer out of the casino that night, witnesses confirmed that he in fact did not. But authorities were also able to verify that he used his keycard to enter his girlfriend's cabin that fateful night at 3:25 a.m. when George and Jennifer were still at the disco and long before he disappeared. The casino manager also took a polygraph test and passed, as did Jennifer, so they were telling the truth. Then authorities were able to go through the cruise ship's room service records to see whether or not the men had ordered room service to their cabins like they said they did. This would have given them some sort of alibi, but after reviewing the records, absolutely no room service was ever delivered to their cabins that night. A couple of really short phone calls were made to room service, but no order was ever placed. Or at the very least, it wasn't ever written down and logged, which was protocol. So I guess it's possible that a mistake was made by one of the room service employees, but it just seems unlikely. Then police started interviewing some of the other passengers that were neighbors to George and Jennifer, and their account of what happened makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. So that night, just after 4 a.m., one of the passengers in a neighboring cabin heard George and 4 other men inside his room. They were pretty rowdy and yelling in the room and out on the balcony, and it sounded like they were all fighting. This was so loud that security was actually called to the room a few times. The neighbor then looked out their door and saw 3 men leaving, which is weird because all 4 men had been inside that room. This has led people to believe that one of them was still inside with George, but this has never been proven. After the 3 men left, the neighbor then proceeded to hear what he described as a horrifically loud thud, and then the sound of furniture moving. That horrifically loud thud is thought to be George as he went overboard, hitting the metal canopy. The neighbor was able to identify the 3 men he saw leaving as the 3 Russian-American men, Rusty, Greg, and Zach. So this looked pretty suspicious, which caught the police's attention. But then something else surfaced, a videotape to be exact, that kind of put the nail in the coffin. A videotape surfaced which was recorded by Josh and the 3 other men, and this was taken about an hour after George disappeared. In it, they all joked about George's death and made some pretty crude remarks. Rusty can be heard laughing, referring to George going parachute riding off his balcony, and Greg can be heard almost bragging about being involved somehow, saying, quote, "See, I told you I was gangster," end quote. And if this wasn't bad enough, 2 days after George disappeared, an 18-year-old passenger on the ship came forward and told police that 3 men had SA'd her not long before George went missing. To everyone's shock, the 3 men were Rusty, Greg, and Zach's little brother, which was also Greg's cousin. The woman told police that she was taken back to one of their cabins and was blackout drunk, but she would come to here and there to discover that she was being SA'd by these 3 men. Not only that though, but they were recording the SA, and who was recording it, you may ask? Josh Askin. The men tried saying this was all consensual, but in the video, the girl is seen and heard clearly crying. This is when everyone pretty much knew that these guys were somehow involved, and 20 days into the investigation, the FBI took over. All 4 of the men and their families were kicked off the ship once it docked in Naples. The SA was investigated by Italian authorities who really didn't want to get involved, so they said they had no jurisdiction and they let the men go. And to this day, no charges have ever been filed in the sexual assault case, even though it was literally recorded. And the fact that those same 4 men were the prime suspects in a literal disappearance on that same ship. Before they were kicked off though, Josh was overheard in one of the elevators on the ship by an employee where he said, quote, "I know more than they think I know. Those fuckers almost got me arrested in Turkey," end quote. Rusty, Josh, Greg, and Zach all failed their polygraph tests in connection to George's disappearance. Despite having all of this evidence, George has never been found, although police believe that he was a victim of foul play and is presumed dead. No charges have ever been filed in connection to this case, which is weird considering you have the main suspects on camera basically confessing to his murder, long before anyone even knew he was missing. And although we don't know what really happened to George, there are a few theories. Theory number one, which is believed by the cruise ship's captain and Jennifer, is that George simply went overboard accidentally, that he was very drunk and just slipped over the railing of his balcony. And the main reason they think this is because of the chair that was found pushed up against his balcony. But police have found no evidence of this, and they believe that foul play was involved. They just don't have enough physical evidence to prove it. Theory number two is that George chose to end his own life. This doesn't make sense though, because he'd only been married for 11 days, and he was on the trip of his life. So his family doesn't believe this theory, or that it was an accident. What doesn't make sense to me though, is that if he did just truly jump, why was there blood in his bed? That wouldn't be there if he jumped. And theory number three is that George was intentionally pushed off his balcony, and he was murdered. Some people believe that this was a robbery gone wrong type of situation. George was somewhat well off, and he always wore this really expensive watch. He and Jennifer also told a lot of people on the ship that they had a lot of wedding gift money back in their cabin, so some think that this made them a target, primarily to Josh, Rusty, Zach, and Greg. And once all four men put George in his bed when he was super drunk, maybe they tried to rob him. Experts say that the drops of blood found on his bed is somewhat consistent with getting pinched by a watch, so it's possible that the men tried forcefully taking the watch off George, pinching him in the process, which made him kind of sober up and wake up. Maybe he then tried to fight back, which resulted in him being pushed off the balcony. This would line up with the fight and sounds of a struggle that his neighbors heard. What I find weird though is that in 2012, this investigation was referred to the Mafia Division of the FBI. So I don't really know what that means, but that seems odd to me. Unfortunately, the FBI closed this case in 2015, meaning George's disappearance and death is still unsolved and has no resolution. Although all of the men lawyered up right away and have never been charged, one of them specifically stood out to the FBI, and it was Greg. Greg later went to prison on a 3-year sentence for drug trafficking, and when asked if he killed George, he said no. He may deal drugs, but he never had it in his heart to kill someone. He told the FBI that he didn't know what happened to him, but that it wasn't an accident and that he didn't end his own life. He said something bad happened to George that night, but he wouldn't elaborate more. In 2019, Greg was shot and killed in front of his home in Florida. Whoever killed him has never been found, and his death remains unsolved as well. Some believe it's because he slipped up and was telling the FBI too much, and that his death was connected to George's disappearance, but this has never been proven. A year after his disappearance, George's wife and parents received over $1 million from Royal Caribbean directly, and Jennifer has since gone on to get remarried. This is one of those cases that honestly pisses me off because it seems so clear what happened, yet almost no evidence was left behind to prove it. And that's scary to me, and one of the main reasons that I will never go on a cruise. But it's now been 20 years, and whatever happened to George on that cruise ship that night remains a mystery.
This is by far the worst cult I've ever heard of. This might actually be the worst case I've ever covered. There's gonna be parts of the story where you're just not gonna believe what I'm telling you because it's so unbelievable and disturbing. Like, just imagine every terrible thing that you could do to other human beings. Rocktario, the cult leader from the Anthill Kids cult, did it. French-Canadian Rocktario was born and raised in Quebec, Canada. He was one of 8 children in an extremely religious family that was also abusive. Rock's dad would force his sons to wear heavy boots and then take turns kicking each other in the shins, and he would call this a game. Rocktario has been described as popular, smart, charming, and charismatic. And apparently he did not have a hard time with the ladies. Apparently they found him quite attractive. Rocktario was also extremely manipulative, and he would do whatever it takes to get what he wants. He got married for the first time when he was 21 years old, and his bride was 17, and together they had 2 children. For a little bit, Rock seemed like a normal family guy, but this did not last long. Rock became extremely erratic. He was addicted to alcohol and substances, and he was also cheating on his wife all of the time. After Rock's first wife divorced him, he married the woman that he was cheating on her with. Please forgive me if you hear Sunny a lot throughout this video. She has a lot of energy right now. Rock Terrio's bizarre behavior continued and escalated, and he became obsessed with medicine and religion. He became a leader within his church where he would do sermons, and he began telling the members of his church that he was a prophet and he could speak to God. Rock was very charming, and he had loyal followers that believed him 100%. And Rock Terrio is very much a classic cult leader, so he also told people that the apocalypse was coming soon, the world was ending, and that he could also heal people with the power of God. One of his followers' wives had leukemia, and Rock convinced her to stop going to her treatments so that he could heal her with the power of God. And because of this woman sadly passed away. Rock's bizarre, erratic behavior and his extreme beliefs eventually got him kicked out of his church. So this was the official start of his cult. Rock had a small, loyal following at this point, but it would eventually grow more and more and more. And somehow Rock was able to convince these people to leave their lives behind and follow him. They left their jobs, they left their families. If they were in school, they dropped out because the world was ending, so none of it mattered. He moved his cult into the mountains, into the wilderness, and together they lived in a commune in the remote, isolated wilderness. This is about 1979. Rock wanted complete control over his followers, so he stripped them of their identities. He decided what they wore, he changed their names, and then he stole their wives. Rock had his legal wife at the cult with him, but he also married every woman there and eventually got them all pregnant. And in total, he had 22 children on top of the 2 children he already had with his first wife. He barely fed his followers. He forced them to do all the work at the commune, which is why he eventually started calling them the anthill kids. And when his followers started to question him, Rock turned to violence to regain control. So this is the beginning of the extreme brutality in this case. This is your warning now that every terrible thing that you could possibly do to someone, Rock Terrio did it. Rock used violence and torture to punish his victims. Here are some of the things that he did. He would hang his followers by the ceiling and then rip the hair that was all over their body one by one. He would go to the bathroom on them. He would force them to sit on hot stoves, force them to shoot each other in the shoulder, and force them to eat dead rodents amongst other things like feces. And this wasn't just the adults, he would punish the children as well. Like, one of the things that he would do was nail a child to a tree and then have the other children stone each other. He would force his followers to cut off other members' toes, or even force them to break their own legs with sledgehammers. And the absolute worst of it, Rock would SA his followers' children. And he would do all of this to test their loyalty and also to punish them, but it was just the beginning. A few years into the cult, a guy named Guy Veer joined the cult, and he was assigned the role as a caretaker for the children. One day, a 2-year-old boy named Samuel just would not stop crying, so Guy actually beat the 2-year-old to the point where he was like in really bad shape. But remember, Rock Terrio believed that he could cure people with the power of God. So he decided that he was going to do a surgery on the 2-year-old boy Samuel, but this is just another form of Rock Terrio's sadistic torture. To sterilize the boy before surgery, he forced rubbing alcohol down Samuel's throat. Then he performed the surgery with a pair of scissors, and sadly, 2-year-old Samuel did not survive the surgery. And Rock took zero accountability for Samuel's death, and instead he fully blamed Guy. And to punish Guy, he was going to do another surgery. With a razor blade, he castrated Guy, which is like removing his manhood. Somehow Guy actually survived, and then he escaped the cult and he went and told the police about the cult and Samuel's murder. The commune was raided, most of the children were taken away, and Rock Terrio was arrested. But he was released a little over 1 year later and just went back to being a cult leader like nothing happened. And it was sadly not long later until there was more death. One of Rock's wives had just given birth to one of Rock's many children, and allegedly she was so scared of Rock and what he was capable of that she did not want her newborn baby to grow up with him. So one night she left her newborn baby outside in the Canadian wilderness during the winter because she believed that freezing to death would be a better fate. At this point, it's the mid-1980s, we're like 5 years into the cult, and Rock Terrio is more brutal than ever. He beat one of his pregnant wives until she lost the baby. I don't know where he found one of these, but he used a blowtorch on the stomach of one of his wives just minutes after she gave birth. He would pour boiling water on his followers. He would break their toes one by one. He would pull out all their teeth with pliers one by one. There was a woman named Solange that one day started complaining about stomach pains. So Rock offered to do another operation. And this was just as brutal and sadistic and not sterile as the last, and Solange also did not survive. After they buried Solange's body, Rock started having dreams of her. So he had his followers dig up her body and then he married her corpse. And he planned to bring her back from the dead, and he did this by cutting a hole in her skull and then pleasuring himself onto her brain. I know, I told you that you weren't even gonna believe some of the things I had to say. This obviously did not bring her back to life, so she was cremated, but he continued to pleasure himself into her ashes. It's so disrespectful, disgusting, and disturbing. There was another woman that was a part of his cult named Gabrielle. This was one of his wives and actually the mother of the baby that was left out in the cold. These are a few of the things that Rock Terrio did to Gabrielle. And remember, I'm not even saying the worst of it because I don't even think I could get away with saying some of the worst things that he did. He burned her private area. He ripped out 8 of her teeth because she was complaining that one of them was giving her a toothache. He cut off one of her fingers. And then one day when she was complaining that one of her fingers was feeling a little stiff, Rock Terrio cut off her arm. She escaped the cult a few days later to go to the hospital, and the hospital called the police. For his crimes, he was sentenced to 12 years in prison, but after a more intensive investigation, they discovered Solange's murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison. But somehow, Rock Terrio still had followers and 3 of his wives. None of them were his legal wives, but he was still given visits with them in prison, and behind bars, he had 4 more children. And then in 2011, Rock Terrio was killed by his cellmate. And that is the case of Rock Terrio and the Ant Hill Kids cult. If you've been watching me for a while, I want to know if you agree that that was one of the worst cases I've ever covered. I want to hear all of your thoughts, but remember to please be respectful because you don't know who could be in the comments. One of these children that grew up, was born in this cult, could be in the comments today. So just please be respectful, but let me know all of your thoughts in the comments. And while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Thank you to everyone that suggested that I covered this case. And I will see you guys all next time in my next video. Please be a good person to your fellow person.
Okay, imagine turning up for a hair appointment, but instead of your hairdresser, you walk in to find blood everywhere and a body on the floor. Yvonne Torch was a beautiful 31-year-old businesswoman. She lived in New York and she was super ambitious, independent and driven. She had this like entrepreneurial spirit, that was difficult to say, but she always knew that she was going to be successful in life. She opened up a hair salon in 1994 called His and Hers. She'd always been amazing at like hair and beauty, and you can probably tell by what she looks like. And her personal life was just as good as her career. She'd actually got a loving husband called Pierre. The pair had lived in the area for years. They'd met in 1990 and married in 1991, and he'd just been her absolute rock. Yvonne had a daughter from a previous relationship, and Pierre spotted her one day just holding this little baby, and he saw her and he was like, she's really cute, and he just decided to take on her own daughter as his own. The pair also then had a child together too, so they had these 2 girls. Pierre sounds like a really good guy, to be honest. He was a fireman and he really said that he had this rush from saving people's lives. But tragically, he wouldn't be able to save his wife. On the 9th of June 2004, it should have been like any other day, and it did start out that way. She got up as normal, she made breakfast, she got ready for work that day and headed over to the salon. There was absolutely nothing off about Yvonne that morning at all. She certainly didn't seem anxious or like she was in any danger. She headed to work in Newborough, and at about 10 a.m. she had an appointment booked in with her husband's nan. She was going to do her hair. She did quite a lot of elderly people's hair. It took her about an hour to do the hair, and then the nan left the appointment. But the next customer that would walk in would get the most horrific shock when they saw Yvonne on the floor in a pool of blood. I can't imagine how horrifying that must have been. Obviously, they immediately called police, and this was kind of like a small community, and people just started talking immediately, and word got out that somebody had died at the hair salon. So Pierre, bless him, had heard this, and because Yvonne did a lot of elderly people's hair, he actually immediately just presumed maybe it's one of the older clients. He raced there straight away, just thinking, oh my god, what an awful accident this must have been. Never imagining in a million years that this was not only his wife, but it was also a murder. So the investigators found out that Yvonne had been killed with blunt force trauma to the skull. This was clearly a homicide, but they had absolutely no suspects. And Pierre was totally heartbroken, and it made absolutely no sense to him or anyone in the local community too. Yvonne was super well liked, she had no enemies, she had no reason for anyone to want to kill her. In fact, her funeral was so rammed full of people because she was so loved. The only thing that was really going on in Yvonne's life apart from her business was the fact that her and her husband were due to move to Florida with the kids. But there was no reason that this would have caused any issues. They were both super happy, really excited to move, and they'd been wanting this for a while. Pierre was ruled out as a potential suspect, and police never identified any other viable suspects. What do you guys think? The only thing I can possibly think of is that somebody was deeply jealous of Yvonne for some reason. Obviously, she was gorgeous, she had an amazing husband, and she had a great career. So that's the only thing I can think of. Let me know your theories in the comments. Yvonne's case remains chillingly unsolved after all of these years.
On February 24th, 2,000 accused gang members were moved into the new mega prison in El Salvador that can hold 40,000 inmates, making it the largest prison in the Americas. It's part of the government's crackdown on crime. In March of 2022, at the president's urging, Congress passed emergency measures that have since been extended multiple times. They've limited civil rights so that arrests can be made without a warrant, and detainees no longer have a right to a lawyer. As a result, 64,000 suspects have been arrested, and the murder rate has fallen by 57%.
Her killer left behind a note that said, "I'm not stupid, bitch." Her murder would go unsolved for a decade, and still there's a lot of people that believe that we don't have all the answers, and there's a lot more to this case. Faith Hedgepath grew up in Warren County, North Carolina, and was a part of the indigenous Native American Hollywood tribe. Faith was clearly very beautiful. She had lots of friends, got great grades, and was overall a high achiever. After high school, Faith was awarded a scholarship for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. She not only had dreams of becoming a doctor, but was super excited to be the first ever member of her family to graduate college, but tragically, she never would. During Faith's freshman year of college, she met and became super close friends with another Chapel Hill student named Karina. She will be very important, so definitely remember her. Before the start of the fall 2012 semester, the two girls, Faith and Karina, were sharing a off-campus apartment together. Faith's roommate Karina had a boyfriend named Eric, an aspiring rapper who had his own apartment, but for some reason was always at Faith and Karina's place. The relationship between Karina and Eric was extremely toxic. They were always arguing. Eric then became violent and physically abusive. So Karina ended things with Eric, and her best friend and roommate Faith supported Karina completely. Faith even drove Karina to get a restraining order against Eric. And instead of blaming himself, Eric completely blamed Faith for Karina breaking up with him. And during the summer before the fall 2012 semester, Eric actually threatened to kill Faith. But by September, it seemed like the situation had quieted down. September 6, 2012, it seemed like any other normal day. The new semester was going great for Faith. She always had lots of friends, always got great grades. That afternoon, Faith had a sorority rush event, and by that evening, she was at the library studying with her roommate and close friend Karina. And by nighttime, the two girls walked to a bar near campus that was known for letting underage college kids in. And then Faith and Karina left the bar by 2 a.m. because Karina said that she drank too much and was feeling sick. They were back to their apartment by 3 a.m., but it seems like Karina wasn't ready for the night to end. Karina texted a guy that she used to date, that was not Eric, to see if he wanted to come over. Karina actually went as far to have Faith text this guy as well to see if he would answer her, but when this guy did not answer Karina, Karina texted a different guy that also went to their college. This guy picked Karina up around 4:30 in the morning and brought her back to his place, leaving Faith home alone. And when she left the house, Karina forgot to lock the front door to their apartment that had street access. The next morning, Karina called Faith multiple times to see if she could give her a ride home and got no answer. She ended up getting a ride home from a different friend. They got to the apartment around 11 a.m., went into Faith's room, and saw blood everywhere. Karina called 911 to report that her roommate was unconscious and unresponsive. When first responders arrived, Faith was laying half off her bed, not wearing anything except for a shirt that had been pulled up over her head. Faith had been murdered at only 19 years old, 2 weeks away from her 20th birthday. In the middle of Faith's bed, her killer left behind a note that they had written on a white paper bag, and the note read, "I'm not stupid." And under that, it just said, "jealous." Faith had a lot of injuries. She had been brutally beaten with an empty alcohol bottle, and her cause of death was listed as blunt force trauma to the head. Sadly, there was evidence that Faith had been SA'd. There was a lot of male DNA found at the scene, and this DNA did not match any DNA that was in the system. Obviously, right away, the first suspect was Faith's roommate's ex-boyfriend, Eric. He had a motive and also said that he was going to kill Faith shortly before someone killed her. On top of that, in the days leading up and the day of Faith's murder, Eric posted a lot of suspicious things on social media. One thing Eric posted wrote, "Dear Lord, forgive me for all my sins and the sins I may commit today." He also posted, "Protect me from the girls who don't deserve me and the ones who wish me dead." He also texted a friend asking them for forgiveness for something that he was about to do. And despite very openly hating Faith for the past handful of months, when questioned by police, Eric only had nice things to say about Faith. He was very cooperative with police and even gave them a sample of his DNA, and the DNA was not a match for the DNA that was at the scene, which shocked everybody. They really did believe that this was a slam dunk and Eric was the killer. Faith's family was very frustrated with the investigation. For 2 entire years, they were not made aware of the autopsy results or that a note was found at Faith's murder scene. And I completely understand keeping information close to the chest. That happens in a lot of investigations, but with a piece of evidence this personal, you'd think it would be helpful to share it with the people that knew Faith best. After exhausting all other theories and leads and persons of interest, suspicion actually quickly moved to Faith's roommate, Karina. People felt like she knew more than she was letting on, and also that her 911 call was weird.
Durham 911, where is your emergency?
I just walked into my apartment and my friend is just like, she's unconscious.
You say your friend is unconscious?
She's unconscious. I just walked in the apartment and there looks like there's blood everywhere.
Okay, listen to me. Is she breathing?
I don't know.
You need to check and see. Is she breathing?
Kate, I don't think so. There's blood everywhere.
There's what?
There's blood everywhere.
Okay.
I don't know what happened.
Okay, is she on her back or is she on her, laying on her stomach?
She's on her back, but like I think she fell off the bed because she's like off the bed. There's blood all over the pillows, like in the comforter.
Definitely let me know what you think of the 911 call in the comments. A lot of people also felt like Karina wasn't acting right. We hear this all the time, but apparently right after finding her roommate and best friend's dead body, she was emotionless and just on her phone texting. But sadly, this case would just go unsolved for years. And after 9 long years, after advancements in DNA technology, specifically DNA ancestry technology, there was finally a DNA match. And that was a DNA match to the now 28-year-old Miguel Salguero Alvarez. And Miguel was charged with the first-degree murder of Faith in September of 2021. There's limited information about Miguel, but this is what I know. Miguel would have been 19 years old at the time of the crime. He was originally from Guatemala, but moved to the United States 2 years before the murder. He was not enrolled at UNC and spoke limited English at the time of the crime. His family, friends, and neighbors were shocked by the arrest, and there is no known link between Miguel and Faith. It is believed that they did not know each other and that this was a crime of opportunity. Today, it's going on nearly 4 years since Miguel was arrested, and this case has still not gone to trial. He is still currently being held without bond, and there is still not a trial date set. He continues to claim his innocence, says that he has never known Faith and did not know Faith. Despite a pretty concrete DNA match, while researching this case, I still found a lot of people that were confused about Miguel's arrest. They were confused what the note meant, how he would know that there was a young, pretty single girl home alone at that time, at that day, and also confused how he would even know that the door would be unlocked. Like, was he just going door to door looking for a door unlocked, hoping that there was a girl home alone? Was he stalking Karina and Faith? That's how he knew that she was home alone. I'm really hoping that this trial date will be set soon and all these questions will get answered, so Faith can finally get justice and her loved ones can finally get answers. After over a decade and despite pretty concrete physical evidence, there's still a lot of people that are suspicious over Karina and her ex-boyfriend Eric. I'm definitely interested to hear what you all think. It's okay to speculate, but please be respectful in the comments. And if you watched the end of this video, thank you so much for listening to Faith Hedgepath's story. I will definitely keep you all updated on this case. Please be a good person to your fellow person. Let me know what case you want to see me cover next. And thank you to everyone that suggested this case. And I will see you guys all tomorrow in my next video.